سلام تخطاتلتنا الشانل كما يكنيكم كما يتخونوا سناي كتكونوا نايوتر من نيوتيو أبزا فيديو زيا حدا زيا قداسي حج زقاطم زلو حبريتا بزعب أفريقيا هنا هنسمع نسدما بريكين نيوز ونيو نسدما كم كتسأل نريو زلنا حجون حدا أب حدا قداس هاجر سلوانا فرنسا كاب أفريقيا مليت يزقوا قالوا نسدما حدا علوا منجسي أب جابون تبهال هاجر نايم عرب أفريقيا أقات يملو سلازي إزعلوا منجسي زي كم مغصلتان أيتن بزحات هاجرات أبتسح الريجنز بحال بفلو يدما فرانكو أفريق زبحال فرنسا تمزمزن زنبرت حوسنات سنت هاللون ديمقراطية لون نعتبهلا أب دارجا مجزعتنا فرنسا زي طرفن زنبر هاجرات هذا دعر هذا كابسلتان يليو ببلشونا ننوحنا أفريقيا خجل جلوس عنه وبرجت كان رينا حجي بب هذا فرنسا كاب أفريقيا أوروبا كاب أفريقيا أي حكار دتريالو زلا جزينا ويتنس قبر دلنا وين مسكر دلنا سلازي أبزا فيديو زي أجد أسمع بالكن رينا مستخال انتاي زمدنا له كابيز مسزلو نبي قصي خيرالو أبزلن كندا ما ناي فرنسا بريزنت أجي أجد أسزربات زاري بنير بزع باز قد دايزي عبد الحريق كن رينا لايك جبرو بليز نزل channel سبورت جبرو إذا حبريت تازدما سمعوه عبد الوازل لوين زبانا جزي خي وسطكو لايك جبرو وانا زا فيديو جزي خي وسطكو نابتي ملغتك نحل فينا let's go now.
We begin with breaking news in Gabon, where a group of military officers claim they have seized power in the Central African country. Gunfire has been reported in the capital, Libreville. The officers say the country's borders are now closed and all state institutions dissolved. In a televised address, they said Sunday's election, in which President Ali Bongo won a third term, lacked credibility. Tensions have been running high since the vote, with claims from the opposition of voting irregularities. So far, there's been no reaction to the announcement from the government.
So, መቸም እትክም ንሪኦ ዘለና ሓንቲ ዓባይ ናይ ነዳዲ ሃብቲ ዘለዎ ሃገር ናይ ኣፍሪካ ኣካል ናይ ኦፔክ ያ ንሰምዕ ዘለና ዳርጋ ንዘበናት ኣቡይ ዘመሓድር ነይሩ ነዚ ሕጂ ዘሎ ሃውስ ፌክ ዲሞክራሲ ዘለዎም እዚኣቶም ከማ ምዕራባውያን ዓለም ከይሓፈሩ ነዚኦም ዲሞክራሲ ኢሎም እዮም ዝከላኸሉ ንኻልኦት ሃገራት ግን ታሽም ይጥቀሙ ንዘሰይም ዓይነት ኣካይዳ ንዘለዎም ስለዚ ዲሞክራሲ ወይ ገለ ክብሉ ከለዉ ናይ ምዕራባዊ ዓለም ኣዝና ክንጥንቀቕ ክንከላ ኣለና هذا سبعي نوع عمتات دحر مجزع نودو السجاجيروا ديمقراطية عينة مرج أيام زجبرو مبل سالساي جزء يزمرس نير تودو أب سالساي جزء دما أب تكسري مختار نايدمسي فيك درجة سعري بهال نيرجن أجات عم عجل كنه دماميرهم تعويت له يلوم نقدام مسنجرو هجي دما وتهدراو علواجيرهم كابسلت أنا أريد أملو هجي كن رياينا زكونتات نبي قصكم عبليو very important الزوان الزي بزحت misconception دي بانك زخون اللي ويدما ننوي حوان بشفان جيروم زتقاملو زنبرو قانقو ابريل تايم ان فشل نريالنا نغط الحج.
Our correspondent Elisa Chakuma is monitoring events in Gabon for us. He joins us from Lagos in Nigeria. Elisa, what more can you tell us about this coup and the people behind it?
Well, Terry, it's still trickling in. The big news this
قدمنا أبزم تاونا تجيب كمي أب كمي كنا تطلعون رأيه مخنياتو زيهم دبلوماسية أوروبا تزاربون ترياليتي رأيه دحرتي الوا مقبارو كت تهزبي أبصر جاتات وتوي كم تاب نيجر درعنايو أب دقوتيو حقوسي جلس على نتستجبر الوا دقوفي جلس على سلزي تكونتات أزيو very very interesting ناخونيز تمعبالي ناقص عليه زخيزلو أبزياون
in power. That's
I think حتى قالوا نيراتني if I could find it. Yes, here is another one. كم تري وزر لهم هزبي باشحات أبصر جاتات وتيو حقو سدي زقل زلو ولا دقوفونتي زقبر زلو سلام الوا منجسي دقوفي جالس exactly 1 to 1 كما أب نيجرينا أب مالي أب بوركينا فاسو كما نابلا أب تشاد زرعنا يكون تاتيو أنا غطى الحجي نبتي ريبورت ناتنا.
This morning early in capital Libreville in Gabon, where we saw army officers, about 12 of them, coming out on national TV in the country to announce that they are putting an end to the regime, calling themselves the Committee for the Transition and Integration of Institutions. They've also talked about cancelling the elections, which was held on Saturday, and closing the borders and dissolving the government, the Constitution, and also the Parliament and the Senate. So that's the fullest we're getting right now from capital Libreville in Gabon, where army officers, soldiers wearing the green beret, red beret, representing different factions of the defense forces, saying that they have put an end to the regime.
So, نريد لنا زيوم وتحضراويان حيلتات نت تلفزيون نايت هاجر تقبلهم نت منجسي نت مرجع كاب سيستم هذا سكيلو ملو أنا جزيود ما دوباتهم كل تاوي سقمتن قبرلو تم علوا جيرم زلوا وتحضرات ናይ ሓደ ዲፓርትመንት ወይ ሚኒስትር ናይ ሓይሊ ምድሪ ወይ ገለ ይኮን ናይ ኩሉ ዓይነት ዲፓርትመንት ወይ ናይ ኩሉ ዓይነት ፊልድ ሓይሊ ኣየር ክኾኑ ይኽእሉ ሓይሊ ባሕሪ ክኾኑ ይኽእሉ ሓይሊ ምድሪ ክኾኑ ይኽእሉ ናይቲ ኩሉ ሰራዊት ውክልና ዘለዎም ኣካላት ናይቲ ሰራዊት እዮም ዕልዋ ገይሮም ዘለዉ ኢና ንብል ዘለና ስለዚ this is unfolding ሕጂ ዘጋጥም ዘሎ ዝምዕብል ዘሎ ኩነታት እዩ ናበይ ገፁ ክኸይድ ጉዳይ ናይ ኒጀር ከይተወድኦ ከሎ ኣብ ተፋጠጥ ከላ ፈረንሳ ሕጂ እውን ዓብ ስዕረት እዩ ዘጋጥማ ዘሎ ኣብዚ እዚ ኩሉ ኣፍሪቃ ናይ ኣፍሪቃ ጉዳይ ገይሩ እዩ ዘቕርቦ ዘሎ እቲ ምዕራባዊ ዓለም ክንጥንቀቕ ኢና ሕጂ ግን ብግልፂ ክዛረቡ ጀሚሮም ኣለዉ ኤውሮጳዊ ሕብረት ተኣኪቡሎ ብዛዕባ እዚ ክዛረብ ክንሰምዕ ኢና ፅንሕ ኢልና
Any word yet on what's become of the elected government? Do we know where President Bongo is?
Well, Terry, that's is a tricky part because since these announcements from these army officers coming very early this morning, just after the electoral body had, said Ali Bongo won Saturday's elections, we are yet to hear from the government. We're yet to hear from Ali Bongo himself or from the military. They did not mention about his whereabouts or how he's doing. The last time we saw Ali Bongo, the president, was when he, made his vote on Saturday during the election. So there's been no word about his whereabouts so far from what we're getting.
And just a few weeks.
ከም ንብሎ ዘለና again እንታይ ይብላሎ ብዛዕባ እቲ ካብ ስልጣኑ ተዓልዩ ዘሎ ወይ ከዓ ኣሊ ቦንጎ ዝበሃል እቲ ንሳልሳይ ግዜ ተመሪፀ ኣለኹ ዝብል ዘሎ ኣበይ ከም ዘሎ እንታይ ኣጋጢሞ ከም ዘሎ ኣብ ኒጀር ሪኢና ኢና ኣብቲ ገዝኡ ዓፅዮም ኣለዎ ክሳብ ሕጂ እዚ ኸ እንታይ ኮይኑ ኸውን ናበይ ከይዱ ኸውን እንታይ ዝተፈልጠ ሓቂ ኣሎ ወላ ሓንቲ ዝተፈልጠ የለን ንብላ ኣሎ እቲ እንኮ ዝፍለጥ ነገር ቀዳም ኣቢሉ ድምፂ ሂቡ ከም ዝነበረ ድሕሪኡ ግን እቲ ምዕባለታት ሃንደበት እዩ ድሕሪ እቲ ውፅኢት ምንጋሩ ሃንደበት ዝተወስደ of course ዕልዋ ኩሉ ግዜ ሃንደበት እዩ ምክንያቱ ንሳቶም ፕላን ገይሮም እዮም ነቲ ህዝቢ ግን ሃንደበት እዩ ዝኸውን ስለዚ እናቐፀለ ዝኸይድ ዘሎ ሕጂ ንስማዕ
ago, of course, there was that coup in Niger. Do analysts in the region see any connection between these events?
Well, of course, Terry, that is what it's all pointing to. Just about a month ago, we had an issue in Niger with the military junta taking over. And just, weeks then, you then have this morning as early, it's Gabon in Central Africa. So if you look at it, in West Africa and Central Africa, since 2020, Terry, combined coups, about 8 coups. Talk a little about the attempted coups reported in places like Guinea-Bissau. So you then have Mali under military junta. You then have Burkina Faso. You have Guinea. You have the issue that we saw in Chad 2 years ago with the Mohamed Idris Deby. And now Niger and now Gabon in the Central African region. Lots to worry.
ኣብዚ ሓለፈ ሒደት ዓመታት ኣብ ምብራቕን ማእከላይን ኣፍሪቃ ከባቢ 8 ዕልዋ መንግስቲ ተገይሩ ኣሎ እዚ ድማ ናይ ብሓቂ ዘጨንቕን ንመብዛሕትኦም ፅልዋት ኩሎም እዚኦም ዕልዋ ዝገብሩ ዘለዉ ድማ ናይ ኤውሮጳ ፅልዋ ዝነበሮምን ረብሓ ናይ ኤውሮጳ ዝምዝምዝዎም ዝነበሩ ሃገራት እዮም ብቐንዲ ድማ ፈረንሳ ማለት እዩ ስለዚ ዓብይ ሾክ ይፈጢሩሎም ዘሎ ስለዚ ሓደ ድሕሪ ሓደ እዚ ጉዳይ እዚ ኣብ ጋቦን ንሪኢ ኣለና ኣብ ጫት ኣጋጢሙ ነይሩ ኣብ ማሊ ኣጋጢሙ ነይሩ ኣብ ቡርኪና ፋሶ ኣጋጢሙ ነይሩ ኣብ ኒጀር ኣጋጢሙ ነይሩ ኣብ ጊኒ ቢሳው ኣጋጢሙ ነይሩ ኣብ ሱዳን እውን ቀጥታ ምስ ከተተሓዘ ይትኽእልን ግን ኤግዛክትሊ ኣብ ሱዳን ዘሎ ኩነታት እውን ስለዚ እዚ ኣዝዩ ዘገርም ኩነታት እዩ እዚኦም ኩለን ሓውሲ ፌክ ዲሞክራሲ ዝነበረን እዮም መብዛሕትኦም ቶም መራሕቲ ንዓመታት ኣብ ስልጣን ዝነበሩ ንምዕራባዊ ዓለም ንፈረንሳን ንካልኦትን የገልግሉ ስለ ዝነበሩ ግን ከም ዲሞክራሲ ተቆፂሮም ነዚ ዲሞክራሲ እዚ ክንከላኸል ኢና እዩ ዝብል ዘሎ ኤውሮጳ ብሓቂ እንተሪኻዮ ግን ዘይተኣደነ ፀጋታት ዘለዎም ሃገራት ግን ህዝበን ካብ ኣደዳ ድኽነት ክወፅእ ዘይከኣለ ሃገራት ኢና ንዛረብ ዘለና እቲ ህዝቢ ድማ ነቲ ኩነታት ዘሎ በዚ ሚድያ ናይ ዩቱብን ናይ ካልእን እታ ኣብ ዓዲ ዝግበር ዘሎ ዝምታን ስርቅን ፅቡቅ ገይሩ ስለ ዝተረድኦ ኩሉ እቲ ፌክ ኒውስ ብቀደም በትን ርድኤትን እኽል እንዶ ገለዶ ዝብልዎ ዝነበሩ ተረዲዎም ገለገለ ሃገራት ከም በዓል ማሊ ኢቨን ቋንቋ ፈረንሳ ካብቲ ዓዶም ንክድምስሱ ይፍትኑ ኣለዉ ወግዓዊ ቋንቋ ናይ ማሊ ፍራንስ ነይሩ እሱ ክህሉ እንደልና ብምባል ናብ እንግሊሽ ይቕይርዎ ኣለዉ ስለዚ ብርቱዕ ዝኾነ ቃንዛ ምዕራባዊ ሚድያ ብፍፁም ነዚ ጉዳይ ናይ ፈረንሳ ከም ምዃኑ ገይሩ ክጠቕሶ ይደልኒ ንእሽተይ እዩ ዘተንብህ ኩላቶም ወላ አልጀዚራኦም ዲዮም ወላ ጋሌን ወላ ዶይቸ ቬለ ሕጂ ክትሪእዎም ኢኹም ኩላቶም ተፀቂጦም እዮም ዝዛረብሉ ዘለዉ ስለዘይ ተርፍ እምበር ኩሉ ክሽፍንዎ እዮም ዝፍትኑ ዘለዉ ክዕፍንዎ እዮም ዝፍትኑ ዘለዉ ንቐፅል ግን ንርኣዮ እቲ ሪያሊቲ ናይ ኣፍሪካ ሚድያ ፅኒሕ ኢሉ ክመፅእ ኩሉ ክንሪኦ ኢና ግን ስቲል ኩሉ እቲ ዝብልዎ ዘለዉ ዳርጋ ዕፅፍናቱ ጌርኩም ረኣይዎ ንሳቶም ከምዚ ፅቡቅ ከም ዝነበረ መንግስቲ ወይ ከዓ ወታደራውያን ሓይልታት ንስልጣን ዝደለዩ ግብቱ ከም ዘለዎ ገለመለ እዮም ዝብሉ ዘለዉ ምግባት ተኮይኑ ንዘበናት እዮም ክግበቱን ክስረቑን ፀኒሖም ዞም ሃገራት ብዛዕባ ዝዛረብ ኣካል ግን የለን
about in terms of for the AU, ECOWAS, and even the countries around the different regions in Africa right now.
Well, Lisa, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. That was DW's Elisa Chukuma in Lagos. Let's get some European reaction to those developments in Gabon. We're joined now by Alexandra van Namen, our Brussels bureau chief. She's currently in Toledo in Spain, where EU defense ministers are meeting. Alexandra, what are we hearing from EU leaders about what appears to be a coup in Gabon?
Well, we asked EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, about his assessment of the situation in Gabon, and you could tell that he was really concerned about the situation. He said that the topic is definitely on the agenda of the ministers' meeting here in Toledo, and he also stressed that if confirmed, this coup would be another evidence how increasingly unstable the situation in the region is becoming, and that is, of course, a reason to be worried for the European Union and its ministers after the coup in Mali, now Gabon, and many analysts are saying that the European Union is losing its influence in the region and that they urgently need a new strategy.
So እንታይ ብልለው ተገርም እዩ ኤውሮጳውያን ሚኒስትር ምክልኻል ናይ ኤውሮጳ ናይ ኩሎም ኣተኣኪቦም ኢመርጀንሲ ሚቲንግ ይገብርለው ዋይ ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ዕልዋ ሰለስተ ገበረ ኢመርጀንሲ ሚቲንግ ይገብርለው እንታይ ማለት እዩ እዚ ናይ ሃገራት ኣፍሪካ ኢመርጀንሲ ሚቲንግ ክገብሩ ዝግባኦም ኤውሮጳውያን ግን ኢመርጀንሲ ሚቲንግ ገይሮም ኣለው ብዛዕባ እዚ ጉዳይ ኣብ ጋቦን ኣጋጢሙ ዘሎ ድማ ብጣዕሚ ሕማቅ ተሰሚዕዎም ወይ ከዓ ኣዝዩ ሲሪየስ ከም ዝኾነ እሞ ፅልዋና ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ካብ መዓልትና መዓልቲ የንቆልቁል ኣሎ ፕሬዚደንት ናይ ፍራንስ ምንፅንሒና ክንሰምዐ ኢና ስለዚ ስትራቴጂናትና ክንቅይር ኣለና ብዛዕባ ኣፍሪካ ሃገራት ኢና ንዛረብ ዘለና እዚኣቶም ግን ኣብ ኤውሮጳ ኮይኖም ኣፍሪካ ግራቶም ከም ምዃኑ እዮም ዝገልጹልካ ዘለዉ ወይ ዝሕብሩና ዘለዉ እዚ ቀደም ብሕቡእ ዝብልዎ ዝነበረ እጅግን ብወግዒ እቲ ዮሴፍ ቦሬል ዝበሃል ናይ ፎሬን ፖሊሲ ናይ ዩሮፒያን ዩኒዮን ኣብ ዝሓለፈ ቪድዮ ገይረልኩም ነይረ ረኣይዎ እንታይ ኢሉ ነይሩ ኣፍሪካውያን ብዛዕባ መፅኣዮምን ብዛዕባ ሂወቶምን ክፈልጡ ዘይክእሉ እዮም ምስ ራሻ ከመይ ገይሮም ዝምድና ይገብሩና ዓና ገሪፎም እናበለ ብትዕቢት ዝዛረብ ዝነበረ ኤውሮጳ ጀርዲንያ ኣፍሪካ ግን ጫካ እዩ ዝብል ዝነበረ እዩ እቲ ሓቂ ግን ጀርዲን ናቶም ካበይ ዝመፀ ፍሩታን ካበይ ዝመፀ ፀጋታትን ካበይ ዝመፀ ማዕድናትን እዩ ፀጋ ገይርዎ ዘሎ ግዜ ክንገድፈ ኢና ኤውሮጳውያን መራሕቲ ብርቱዕ ነርቨስነስ ሒዝዎም ከም ዘሎ እዚ ድማ ኣፍሪካ ረብሓኦም ሃገራቶም ባዕሎም ክመልኩ ስለ ዝፍትኑ ዘለዎ ጥራይ ንኣፍሪካ መፅኦም ንኤውሮጳ መፅኦም ሃገሮም ክሕዝሎም ወይ ዓዶም ክገዝሎም ስለ ዝፈተኑ ይኮኑ ንኤውሮጳውያን ከምዚ ክንዛረብ ከለና ገሊኦም ኣለው ሓንጎሎም ናይ ኤውሮጳ ቫይረስ ዝኣተዎ እንተኾንከ ኢኻ ኣንፃር ኤውሮጳ ትዛረብ ዘለካ ብላብላ ዌክ ኣፕ ማይ ፍሬንድ ክትበራበረሉ መዓስ ኢኻ ክትበራበር ምክንያቱ ንዛረበ ዘለና ከማኻ ዝመስሉ ደቂ ኮንቲነንት ናትካ ደቂ ክፍለ ዓለም ናትካ ምዝመዛ ናትና ይኣኽለና ዓድና ናፅነት ንደለና ንሕና ብምርጫናን ነቲ ዘለና ኣብዛ ዓድና ተዋሂብና ዘሎ ፀጋ ክንጥቀም ውፁልና ይብሉለው ንኤውሮጳ ኣብዚያሲ ስለምንታይ ከምፆም ክትሓብር ዘይትኽእል ስለምንታይ ኩሉ ግዜ ንኣፍሪካ ክትዳኸም ናይ ኣፍሪካ ምስዓዱ ኮንካ ንኣፍሪካ ምድኻም ቀዳማይ ስራሕካ ይኸውን ወይ ንከምዚ ዓይነት ዜና ነግር ዘለና ኣንፃር ኤውሮጳ ትዛረብ ኣብ ኤውሮጳ እናተቐመጥካ እወ ኣብ ኤውሮጳ እናተቐመጥኩ መሰል ኣለኒ ክዛረብ ብዙሓት ኤውሮጳውያንን ብዙሓት ኣሜሪካውያን እውን ዝዛረብዎ እዮም እቶም ነቲ ሓቂ ዝፈልጡ ነቲ ኩነታት ድማ ከም ዘለዎ ዝርእይዎ ብስርቅድ ምንባር ይኣክል ኤውሮጳ ዝኣክል ፀጋታት ኣለዋ ቅድሚ ሕጂ ዝሰረቕኩሞ መለሱልና ንብለኩም የለና ቅድሚ ሕጂ ዝሰረቕኩሞ ይኣኽለኩም ካብ ሕጂ ንድሓር ግን ኣፍሪካ ኩነታቶም ንክገብሩ ግደፍዎም ኢና ንብል ዘለና ንቐፅል ድሓር
for the Sahel.
Now, this apparent coup in Gabon comes just weeks after another military takeover in Niger. Both these countries are former French colonies. You mentioned EU influence in the region. France is particularly involved. What does this mean for France?
Well, France is definitely in a unique situation here as a former colonial power in the region, and they still have troops across the region fighting there against Islamists. And we have seen the military junta in Mali, for instance, in Niger, targeting France in particular, and also calling on the French ambassador to leave the country. So there is also a growing criticism when it comes to French strategy for the region. But so far, we heard from the French president, Emmanuel Macron, was quite defiant, defending the French policy there and saying that it was actually France that had so far prevented the growth of Islamistic movements in the region. But the criticism is growing, as I said. And of course, we have to see how the discussion will be progressing here during the...
እዚ ጉዳይ እዚ ትማል ናይ ኒጀር ዕልዋ ተኻይዱ ክሳብ ሕጂ መፈፀምታ ዘይረኸበ ከሎ ኣብ ድርኩ ኮይትና ኢና ንርኢ ዘለና በቲ ቡርኪና ፋሶ በቲ ማሊ እንታይ እዩ እዚ ኩነታት እዚ ካበይ ኤውሮጳ እንታይ ፀገማ ፈረንሳ ከበቆኑ እንታይ ፀገማ ይብላ ኣሎ ኦፍ ኮርስ ናይ ፈረንሳ ፅልን ኣንፃር ፈረንሳን ዓብ ብርቱዕ ምንቅስቃስ ይካየድ ከም ዘሎ ንርኢ ኣለና ፈረንሳ ድማ ኣብ ዩኒክ ሲቹዌሽን ወይ ከዓ ኣብ ፍሉይ ዝኾነ መድረክ እያ ዘላ ትብለላ እንታይ ዩኒክ መድረክ ኣብዘይ ዓድኻ ኣብ ምምዝማዝ ይኣኽለካ ምባል ማኣሲ ክስቆሮም እዚኦም ገዛእቲ ቀደም ኢልዎ ቶማስ ሳንካራ እንታይ ኢሎም ገዛእቲ ኣይፀግቡን እዮም ኢልዎ ገዛኢ ኣይፀግብን እዩ ተመስገን ኣይብልኒ ክበልዓካ ኩሉ ግዜ ኣይደክምን እዩ ኣይሓፍርን እዩ ሕማቕ ኣይስምዖን እዩ ስለዚ ፈረንሳ ኢንፋክት ኣብዚ እዋን እዚ እቲ ዕልዋ መንግስቲ ገይሩ ዘሎ ብህዝቢ ዝድገፍ ዘሎ መንግስቲ ናይ ኒጀር ንፈረንሳ ካብ ሃገርና ውፅእ ኢልዎም ኣይንወፅን ኢልዎ ኣሎ ኣብ ብርቱዕ ምትፍናን ኣሎ ፅኒሕና ክንሪኦ ኢና ንሕና ኢና ካብ ግብረ ሽበራ ንከላኸለልኩም ዘለና ግብረ ሽበራ ይሕሻና ውፁእ ካብ ዓድና ንስኹም ትኸፉ ካብ ግብረ ሽበራ እቲ ህዝቢ ድማ እንታይ ኢሉ እንድሕሪ ኢኮዋስ ዝበሃል ሓደ ናይ ኣፍሪካ ሓይሊ ኣሎ ናይ ምዕራብ ኣፍሪካ ንሱ ምስ ፈረንሳን ገለን ተኮይኑ ከሃርማዩ ወሲኑ ዘሎ እሳንተ ታሪምካ ግን ኩል ብዙሓት ሃገራት ድማ ምስ ኒጀር ክንከውና ኢሎም ኣሎ እቲ ህዝቢ ድማ እንታይ ኢሉ ቁፀሩና ንሕና በዓልና ኣብቲ ውትድርና ክንኣቱና ኢሉ ይስራዕ ኣሎ ኣብቲ ሰራዊት ከይዱ ንሃገሩ ንክከላኸል ምክንያቱ እቲ ረብሓ ናይ ፈረንሳ እቲ ፈረንሳ ትገብሮ ዘላ ምዝመዛ ኣብዚ ስለ ዝበፅሖም 30% ዝኸውን ካብ 20 ክሳብ 30% ዩራኒየም ናይቲ ሃገር ናይ ፈረንሳ ማለት እዩ ካብ ኒጀር እዩ ዝኸይድ ኒጀር ካብ 9% ህዝቢ ልቺ የብሉን ወይ መብራህቲ የብሉን ፈረንሳ ግን ንህዝባ ዝኾነ ሓሊፉሲ 4 ቢልዮን ልዕልዩ ገንዘብ ንዓመት ኣታዊ ካብቲ ሽያጥ ናይቲ ኤሌክትሪክ ያተእቱ ስለዚ እዚ ኻ ንኽንደይ ዓመት ቀፂሉ ን100 ዓመት ልዕልዩ ይኸውን ሜቢ ስለዚ ይኣኽለና ይብሉን እዮም ኣብ ልዕልዩ ድማ እቲ ናይ ባንኪንግ ሲስተም ናይ ፋይናንስ ሲስተም ገንዘብ ሃብቲ ናይቲ ሃገር ኢቭን ካብቲ ትረኽቦ ንእሽተይ ክፋል እውን ንኒጀር ኣይምለስኒ እቲ ገንዘብ እንታይ ዳ ኣብ ፈረንሳ ኮይኑ በቲ ናይ ትሬጀሪ ናይ ፈረንሳ ብኡ ማኔጅ ዝኾን ስለዚ ምዝመዛ ናይ ፈረንሳ ጠገለ የብሉን ነዚ ኸማን ይኣኽለና ኢሎም ክወፁ ኣይክእሉን እዮም ክንዲዚ ዝሰረቑ ገና ክንቅፅል ኢና ዝብል ናይ ብሓቂ ዝስማዓኒ ዘሎ ነዚ ኩነታት እዚ ግን it is what it is
a meeting of the defense and later on foreign ministers of the European Union and what kind of proposal we will see on the table.
Alexander, thank you very much. That was DW's Alexander from Namen.
So ከም ንሪኦ ዘለና ኔክስት ሕጂ ካብ አልጀዚራ ዝመፀ ሓድሽ ሪፖርት ብካልእ ገፅ ክንሪኦ ኢና ድሕሪ ኣብቲ ናይ ፈረንሳ ዘረባ ክንኣቱ ኢና ንግዚኡ ነዚ መግለፂ ናይቲ ዕልዋን ናራና ክንፀንሕ ኢና
Coup d'etat happening right now in Gabon. Today, 5:30 a.m. Gabonese time, local term, the citizens of Gabon woke up to the sound of gunfire in the capital Libreville as the army took power in that country. And it's less than 24 hours after the results of the disputed election that concluded on Monday, where the current president won by 64.2%. So the army say that they have observed an irresponsible and foreseeable governance that has led to the steady degradation of social cohesion, risking plunging Gabon into chaos.
All right, let's listen to this one now.
Call on the population for calm and serenity, and we affirm our attachment to the respect of Gabon's commitments to the international community.
Okay, let me give you some geographical context here because the Republic of Gabon is situated on the western shores of Central Africa. The country has been run by one family for more than 55 years. Omar Bongo Ondimba was only the second president of Gabon. He came to power in 1967 following the death of the president Leon Mda, who remained there until his death in 2009. Ali Bongo Ondimba succeeded his father and was then re-elected as president in August of 2016. He has so far
ن55 ክገዝዝ ዝፀንሐ ፋሚሊ ናይ ዝዓዲና ዲሞክራሲ ተባሂሎም እዮም ከዓ ንዲሞክራሲና ንከላኸል ዘለና እዮም ዝብሉ ዘለዉ ኤውሮፓውያን ናይቲ ዲሞክራሲ ኣይርዳእንን እዩ ንወዱ ኣረኪብዋ ከይዱ እቲ ሃገር ስቲል the same process ኣለዋ ብዙሕ ፀጋታት ዘለዎ ሃገር ክነሳ
served 2 7-year terms, and of course on Wednesday it was announced that he had won a third term following Saturday's election.
ክልተ ናይ 7 ዓመት ስልጣን ገይሩሎ ሕጂ ሳልሳይ ግዜ ተመሪጡ ዘሎ እዩ ዝበሃል ዘሎ ማለት እዩ ትወዱ እዚ
And Gabon is the fourth largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa. The country is a full member of OPEC. Let's go to Nick Hack, who joins us now live from Dakar. Nicholas, you've covered West and Central Africa extensively. You've been speaking to people in Gabon this morning. What more can you tell us about what's going on there?
Well, from people that I spoke to in certain neighborhood in Libreville, in the capital, there are scenes of joys with hundreds of people taking to the streets, chanting that Gabon is liberated, Gabon is free. It's the end of a one-party system or a family holding on to power for the last 60 years. So there's a real sense of joy in certain neighborhoods. In other neighborhoods, we're seeing the soldiers patrolling the streets. And according to the people that we spoke to, there's uncertainty. Are these troops that are loyal to Ali Bongo, or are these troops that have orchestrated what appears to be a coup? What's interesting is the timing of all of this. So just minutes before this address made by these soldiers on national television, well, the Election Commission had announced the results to Gabon's population, announcing that Ali Bongo had won these elections. And just minutes after, we saw this announcement where we saw members of the military wearing red, green, and black berets.
So እንታይ ብላ ኣሎ መጀመርያ እቲ ህዝቢ ኣብ ገለ ክፋል ናይቲ ሃገር ወይ ኣብ ገለ ክፋል ናይቲ ከተማ እቲ ህዝቢ ሓጎሱ ይገልጽ ኣሎ ድሕሪ ናይ ነዊሕ ግዝኣት ናይ ሓደ ሰብን ናይ ሓደ ፋሚልን ሕጂ ናጽነትና ረኺብና ሓርነትና ረኺብና ዝብል ድምፂ ክረኣይ ከሎ ብካልእ ግን ብዙሕ ወታደራት ይረኣዩ ኣለዉ ኣብ ካልእ ኩነታት ክንሪኦ ከለና ድማ እቲ ታይሚንግ ወይ ከዓ እቲ ግዜ ናይቲ ዕልዋ መንግስቲ ዝግበር ዘሎ ልክዕ ነቲ ውፅኢት ይፅበዩ ነይሮም እዮም ድሕሪ ንነዊሕ ዝወሰደ ምቁፃር ናይ ድምፂ ልክዕ እቲ ኮሚሽን ናይቲ ምርጫ ነቲ ናይ ቀደም ዝነበረ 2 ግዜ 7 ግዜ ዝመርሐ ወዲ እቲ ናይ ቀደም ፕሬዚደንት ዝነበረ ማለት እዩ ወዱ ስልጣን ወሲዱ ምስ ተባሃለ ልክዕ ድሕሪ እቲ ዕልዋ ተኻይዱ ይብላ ኣሎ
One speaking was wearing a black beret, suggesting that he was part of the infantry brigade, but there was also civilians showing a united front, saying that this is the end of a regime. And just hours before, the internet was shut down in Gabon following those elections. And so now the Gabonese seem to be able to communicate to each other, and they're waking up to what seems to be a new regime. No news yet of Ali Bongo himself, but I can tell you what, when I spoke to some people before, ahead of the elections or during the election day, they were scared to talk, to communicate, to tell us what was actually happening. And today they're finally telling us how this election took place. Some of them told us they saw a fraud on a massive scale in the capital, Libreville, where people were exchanging their votes against 10,000 CFA bills, or that they saw the military taking out ballot boxes from certain areas of the neighborhood, really trying to fiddle with these elections. There was no international observers there to see what was going on. Our team from Nairobi that was supposed to be there to cover those elections were not allowed in. So this is
እንታይ ብላ ኣሎ እቲ ምርጫ ክሳብ ትማሊ ደዊልና ክንሓትት ከለና ብዛዕባ እቲ ምርጫ ከመይ ከም ዝነበረ ሰብ ክገልጽ ሓሳቡ ክገልጽ ይፈርህ ነይሩ ኣብዚ እዋን እዚ ግን ብዙሓት ሰባት ክሕብሩና ጀሚሮም እቲ ምርጫ ድማ ብመሰረቱ ብልሽውና ዝነበሮን ትክክል ከም ዘይነበረን ብዙሕ ናይ ድምፂ ምስራቕን ብገንዘብ ምግዛእን ካልእ ብወታደራት ዝግበር ዝነበረ ምዝንባዕ ናይቲ ድምፅን ከም ዝነበረ እዚ ድማ እዚ ኩሉ ምስ ተገበረ እቲ ውፅኢት ንምንታይ እዩ ነቲ ናይ ቀደም ዝነበረ ፕሬዚደንት ኣብ ስልጣን ንምጽናሕ ማለት እዩ ግን ብዲሞክራሲ ከም ዝተመረፀ ጌርካ ንምቕራብ ማለት እዩ ስለዚ ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ዘሎ ዲሞክራሲ ወይ እቲ ዲሞክራሲ ዝበሃል ነዚ ዝመስል I know ብዙሓት ሰባት ኣይትፈትውን ኢኹም ዲሞክራሲ ገለ ስለ ትብሉ ዲሞክራሲ ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ክሳብ ሕጂ ናይ ሰርሕኒ ዘሎ ኣብ ዝበዝሐ እዚ ሃገር እዚኣ ዲሞክራሲ ኣለዋ እያ ትበሃል እቲ ሓቂ ንምዝራብ ነቲ ዝደልይዎ ኣሜሪካን ኤውሮጳን ንዕኦም ዘርብሕ ተኮይኑ ከም ዲሞክራሲ እዮም ዝፅውዕዎ the same ዓይነት ኣብ ካልእ ሃገር እንተሎ ግን ዲክቴተርሺፕ ወይ ካብ ውልቀ መላኺ እዮም ዝብሎ ብካልእ ኣዘራርባ እቲ ዝጥቀምሉ ቋንቋ ንዓታቶም ንረብሖም የገልግል የገልግልን እምበር ነቲ ህዝቢ ዲሞክራሲ ኣለዎ ዶ የብሉን ንምግላጽ ኣይኮኑን እዚኣ ያ ድማ ክትበርሃልኩም ዘለኹ ዲሞክራሲ ሕማቕ እዩ ኣየድለና ንገለን ማለት ኣይኮነን እቲ ምዕራባዊ ዓለምን ሚድያ ናቶምን መራሕቶምን ዝነግሩና ዲሞክራሲ ብዛዕባ ኣፍሪካ ወይ ዝሕብሩኻ ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ዘሎ ዲሞክራሲ ኣይኮነን ንዓታቶም ዘርብሕ መንግስቲ ዲክታተርሺፕ ድዩ ዲሞክራሲ ድዩ they don't care ta ዲሞክራሲ ድማ ብዓብዩ መሳርሒ ናይቲ ኣጀንዳ ናቶምን ንምዝመዘኦምን ንጽልዎኦምን ዳኣምበር ንህዝቢ ከም ዘይኮነ በተደጋጋሚ ንሪኦ ኣለና ኣፍሪካ ናጽነታ ካብ ትረክብ ዝበዝሕ ሃገራት ማለት እዩ 60 ዓመት ልዕሊ ገይረን ኣለዋ ንሪኦ ዘለና ውፅኢት ግን ወላ ሓንቲ ፍሉይነት የብሉን
It's no surprise that there is such a level of joy, given the fact that the situation in this wealthy country, this oil-rich country, has been deteriorating. So while this country is rich in oil, it is poor in terms of the wealth hasn't been trickling down to the population. There was a lot of anger amongst people about that their circumstances have been going from bad to worse in the last few years in under Bongo's presidency. But we still haven't heard from him. We heard from Emmanuel Macron yesterday. There was this announcement, the speech made to all of its ambassadors. And we have to remember that Gabon is a former French colony that is key, a strategic ally to France. Both because of its geographical location and both because it's oil rich and that France has profited from this oil in the last couple of years. Well, he said that he is standing for democracy. So it'll be interesting to see how the French react to this coup that just happened under their nose. In Libreville, there's 2 French military bases, 700 French soldiers in the capital itself, and at Port-Gentil in the north of the country too. Now, it'll be interesting to see how they react to this situation. For the past decades, they have been supporting the regime in place. They say the democracy in Gabon. But this democracy doesn't speak to everybody in Gabon. As you can see,
سمعوا لهم this is very very tough language ንፈረንሳ ኩዕጥዋ ይክእሉን እዮም እንታይ ይብሉ ኣለዉ ኣብ ትሕቲ ፈረንሳ ዝነበረት ግዝኣት ኮይና ፈረንሳ ካብዚ ናይ ጋቦን ጸጋታትን ነዳድን ብጣዕሚ ትኸስብ ዘላን ትረብሕ ዘላ ሃገርን እንትኾነ እቲ ህዝቢ ጠቕላላ ረብሓ ዘይብሉን ካብ ኣደዳ ድኽነት ዘይወፀን እዩ ስለዚ እቲ ገንዘብ ሃገር ብዙሕ ጸጋታት ኣለዋ ነዳዲ ኣለዋ ገለገለ ካብተን ዓበይቲ ናይ ነዳዲ ሃብቲ ዘለወን ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ግን ነቲ ህዝቢ ረብሓ ክኸውን ኣይከኣለን ፈረንሳ ነቲ ዝነበረ ናይ ክንደይ ዓመታት 55 ዓመት ብፋሚሊ ክግዛእ ከሎ ንዖም ስለ ዘርብሕ ንዲሞክራሲ ንከላኸል ኣለና ዲሞክራሲ ነስፍሕ ኣለና እዮም ዝብሉ ኣብ ሚድያ መፅኦም ከይሓፈሩ እቲ ሓቂ ግን ዲሞክራሲ የለ ገለ የለ እቲ ዘጋጥም ዘሎ ኩነታት ነዚ ድማ እዩ ትማሊ ቅድሚዛ ቪድዮ እጅ ንገብሮ ዘለና ሓደ መዓልቲ 2 መዓልቲ ተቐዲሙ ማክሮን እንታይ ኢሉ ነይሩ ንኩሎም ኣምባሳደራቱ ብፍላይ ኣፍሪካ ንዘለዉ ብጣዕሚ ክንሰርሕ ከም ዘለና ዲሞክራሲ ክነብል ከም ዘለና ፅኒሕለ ከምፃልኩም ክሳብ ክንደይ ስጋት ከም ዘለዎም ልዕሊ 700 ወታደራት ኣለዉ ኣብዛ ዓዲ እዚ ነዚ ኩነታት እዚ ክቆፃፀርዋ ይከኣሉና ኣለዉ ህዝቢ ኣንጻሮም ደው ይብሉ ኣለዉ እንታይ ከም ዝገብሩ ኣይፈልጡን እዮም ስለዚ እቲ ኩነታት ታስዓት ከም ዝኣኸለት ፈረንሳ ጠቕሊላ ክትከይድ እያ ፈረንሳ እዚ ረብሓ እዚ እንተቋሪፅዋ እንታይ ክትከውን እያ ንግዜ ንገትፎ ማለት እዩ
scenes of joy in certain neighborhoods, and a lot of people wondering who's in charge of this country this morning. Marlene?
Very interesting to get your perspective. Nicholas Hack there for us in Dakar. Let's go to Ahmed Idris now. He joins us now live from Niamey, the capital of Niger, where, of course, just last month, the military there also took over power. Ahmed, interesting listening to Nicholas Hack's perspective there about France and what their involvement could be in the future, because this looks like another coup in a francophone Africa. I mean, there seems to be at least a pattern emerging.
Exactly. What happened in Mali 3 years ago set a chain reaction across Francophone West and Central Africa. And now the region is fast becoming one of the most politically unstable regions in addition to insecurity as well as economic decline. So basically, people are wondering what's happening. But again, when you talk to political analysts in the region, they will tell you about the deprivations, the economic malaise, the insecurity that's been there, and the inability of governments in power, democratically elected governments in power, to deal with these situations. Corruption is also one of the major factors. And now it will be interesting to see how the African Union reacts to this. We know their initial reaction is to suspend countries, member countries that where coups have taken place. We've seen that with Mali, we've seen that with Burkina Faso, Guinea, and now Niger. And it's expected very soon they will also announce that Gabon is suspended from the membership of the African Union. But what is interesting is we hardly will see any effective sanctions being applied on Gabon simply because of its mineral resources, something that we've seen happening in Mali and Burkina Faso right now.
So again, እዚ ጋዜጠኛ ሕጂ ካበይ ይዛረብ ዘሎ ካብ ኒጀር ማለት ዕልዋ መንግስቲ ገይሮም ምስ ፈረንሳ ውፁልና ይንወፅን እናበሉ ብሓይሊ ብነፈርቲ ክሃርምዋ ምስ ዘለዩ ድማ ተንጎረባብቲ ሃገራት ብልዕልና ከይተሓልፉ ብምባል ብፍላይ ኣልጀርያ بأير ناتنا فرنسا خيت نفاريتا خيت زل كي تحلف مبال تنقر باب حجرات كلن مساب سوليداريتي تتوز بالعلى زلوا حجرات أفريقيا نمجزاتن مزمزان دوز بالعلى زلوا مدرخينا زلنا تكونت تاريخ أيو إذا كنت تزي بتوم بديمقراطية استمرت بحالو زنبرو زي تقال تا ديمقراطية كتك عمل لهم تخبدنا اللعنة مغنياتو نرب حمبر ديمقراطية كم زين بره كابو بمغطال دما بلشونا كالي زي معروي أسرارها أتنا هجرات كوتاس التراب حنن أجانن أزيح مع مخانو أفريقيا حبرت أبزوان زي كجوايز جبا مفتوح كون زي جبا أتأنكوز جبراز ولا تقعد هذه من أتنا هجرات كاب بالنتنا حبرت أفريقيا يزوج أنزلوا الجداتات هون يورد له مغنياتو أفريقيا حبرت زبها مسار هنا أوروباويان أمريكا نمبر نا أفريقيا تتوقف زي كل لموز خون أورجانيزيشن يقين زلا بزوان زي نفسك ساب زي كعلى دما نا أفريقيا خرب حيكلني الجدا قبل على زي حجر دياج كجبر دياج جبرن أسجع عملك حتى مغنياتو ندادي سلزلوا بزوج أجتا سلزلوا التجدا نخلو تجراتون كهاس سلزغل نغط نسمع.
The expectation of many political analysts in West Africa and Central Africa was that when there is a coup, the strangulation, economic strangulation should be applied to enforce the rule that the military should go back to the barracks and restore democracy. But what we continue to say in these countries is that mining of mineral resources and oil continue in those countries. So basically, people are watching. But here in Niger, people are just waking up to the news, and it will gladden the heart of the military authorities here that at least one other African country have seen their way, at least. Marlene?
Okay, Ahmed Idris, there for us in Niamey, the capital of Niger. Let's get the perspective of Awigwe Agwego. He's a security analyst for Afro-Politica, which is a security consultancy. He joins us now from Ankara. Firstly, give us your understanding of what is happening in Gabon at the moment.
Yes, I think with the coup in Gabon, it came as a surprise, but to some extent, not really, because if you go back to 2016, for instance, where there was an election, the election was seen as fraudulent, who protested, and that was Ali Bongo's second election. Then there was a coup attempt rather in 2019, and they cited the fact that the elections were fraudulent and was not representative of the will of the people. So we fast forward to last weekend's election. Again, we're seeing the same pattern of people thinking they voted in one direction or they were never given an opportunity to vote.
Again, تايبلو تكونتات ولا زي أب جابون تأجاتي مزلو علوا منجسي كابتس بيت وصعي كونن مخنياتو already أب زحلفوان أفكتشان أترشد شام مريكا هزبي بزح تقاوم غير خمسة نبرة طري مريكا خمسة نبرة دحيرون دحر خلطة ثلاث عامات علوا منجسي علوا تفتين خمسة نبرة وتصيتها وخمسة كونن سلازي تكونتات أب مسرح زنبرة حجي أفتك بارز بس حنيو يبلنا له حنت كريادة ليد اللي خجي نرى خمسة نهم نزنا هزبي رايزينج نرى خمسة نهم تاناي فرنسا ماكرون استزارة بخنا بلينا نشتي ما خمسة معنا زي دحري تناي فرنسا خنرينا.
Vote for the candidates that they chose, and that kind of widespread dissatisfaction with the electoral process. I think I have to underscore this fact that the coup in Gabon is very different from what we're seeing in other parts of West Africa, because while that is more about security and governance, this is specifically about the electoral process, because time and time again we see these patterns repeat in Gabon, and the military comes in and they make the same argument.
That's a very good point that you make there. So what you're saying is there will be support for this coup?
Yes, already. If you look at the streets of Gabon, people are celebrating and celebrating the coup. And even if you look at the statement of the pushes, you would see that they are very much specifically talking about transition and restoration of institutions. So again, that goes back to, like I said, the electoral process, and they're dissolving all of the institutions like the Senate, hoping that in the transition process they would maybe look at the constitution and also look at how to strengthen state institutions regarding political process.
I guess the question is, what happens next, and how united is the military in what is taking place right now? We've been listening to our...
So in general comes below the low. 1 second. እቲ ቀንዲ ኩነታት ዝብልዎ ዘለዉ እቲ ዝግበር ዘሎ ዕልዋ ከምቲ ምዕራባዊ ሚድያ ዝብሎ ዘይኮነስ ብትኽክል ህዝቢ ዝደልዮ ዘሎ ከም ምዃኑን በቲ ዘሎ ሲስተምን በቲ ኣካይዳ ናይተን ሃገራትን ዕጋበት ከም ዘይነበሮምን ለውጢ ክደልዩ ከም ዝፀንሑን ስለዚ ግድን ለውጢ ኣብ ዝድለየሉ ዘሎ ግዜ መድረኽን ኮይና ክንሪኦ ከም ዘለና እቲ ኩነታት እዩ ዝዝረብ ዘሎ ስለዚ ሕጂ ክንርኢና ናይቲ ናይ ፈረንሳ ፕሬዚደንት ኣብ ዝቐረባ ዝገበሮ መደረን ንዑ ዝትህስስ ኩነታትን ክንርኢና give me a second, I'm coming to you because this is very important. ነቲ ኩነታት ድማ ብፅቡቅ ገይሩ ክገልፀልና ዝኽእል ስለዝኾነ እቲ ኩነታት ክንርኢና ማለት እዩ Now let's go to the situation and let's go now.
French President Emmanuel Macron is making his annual address to French ambassadors today. He's been covering so far a series of topics, including France's role in Africa and what he called a weakening of the West's role in the world. Let's listen.
I believe our policy is the correct one. It's based on the courage of President Bazoum, on the efforts of our diplomats and our ambassador in Niger, who will stay despite pressure from coup leaders. We do not recognize them. We support the president, who's not resigned.
France 24's Angela Diffley was listening to that speech.
سنتهي بلالو مجمريا نحن نختلو زلنا بوليسي اب افريكا تخكلنيا يصبغيو نما ندقف لنا نتم بديمقراسي تمرصو ما مرحتي نحتاتو من ندقف زلنا مخنياتو ساتو يم بديمقراسي تمرصو اوف كورس ساتو يم زربعوها ساتو يم صقاها زخدو ساتو يم نخد مزمز عدلي بام كعصابجي سلازي نعم دقافكم ولا حنت زقرم يبلون تهزبي نهزبي انت تحاسبون يركم تهزبي وصولنا زبلكم زلا بترجع وتيو ايفن اب وتهدر كوين خواقاكم يزبل زلو تهزبي نهزبي سمي كانت تخيل تزحشن يرجن اوف كورس توماس سانكار قدم يلوي مزمز تحيلتات تمزجنا يبلون يمكن من تاي سريقهم كا نغص الحج نسمع يوت اناليسيس
Speech with me, a speech that's still going on after about a good hour and a half. Angela Macron earlier was warning against what he called this risk of a weakening West. Tell us a bit more about that.
He was also referring to the BRICS Plus summit recently, this idea that Western dominance is really being challenged now. And he said, this is what's happening. We need to take notice of it. There is, if you just look at the Ukraine war, often a perspective from what we sometimes call the global south or any other countries outside the US and Europe, that when a country is invaded elsewhere in the world, it is seen as a territorial dispute. When it is a country which involves Europe or the US, it is seen as a matter of universal values and something quite different. That really irritates countries outside the West, and there's this growing challenge to the West. I think he wanted to talk a little about Africa.
እቲ ዘሎ ኩነታት ኤሮፓ ጽልዋ እናደኸመ ይኸይዳሎ ምዕራባዊ ዓለም ጽልዊ እናደኸመ ይኸይዳሎ ብመንጽሩ ድማ ኣብዚ ናይ ብሪክስ ከምኡ ድማ ብሪክስ ፕላስ ተን ሃገራት ተወሲኽኖ ዘለዋ እንተሪኢና ዓለምና ናበይ ትኸይዳላ እሱ ድማ ኤሮፓ ትጥቀመሉ ዝነበረትን ምዕራባዊ ዓለም ዝኽተሎ ዝነበረን ኣብ ኤሮፓ ንዘጋጥም ከም ዓብዪ ናይ ሙሉእ ዓለም ሽግር ጌርካ ምቕራብ ኣብ ካልኦት ሃገራት ዘጋጥም ግን ንዓታቶም ጥራይ ዝምልከት ቅድሚ ሕጂ ሚኒስትሪ ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ፎሬን አፌርስ ናይ ህንድ ነጊርዎም ነይሩ ንስኻትኩም ክትልብም ኣለኩም ናትኩም ጉዳይ ናይ ሙሉእ ዓለም ጉዳይ ናይ ካልኦት ጉዳይ ግን ንዓኹም ዘይምልከት ጉዳይ ጌርኩም ርኣይ ክትሰግርዎ ዝግባኣኩም እዩ ስለዚ ዩክሬንን ፀገምኩም ንዓኹም ዝምልከት እዩ ስለምንታይ ንዓና ምዝ ዲኻ ምዝ እናበልኩም ተሸግሩና ኣለኹም ኣብ ጅቡቲ ኣብ ኤርትራ ኣብ ኢትዮጵያ ኣብ ሱዳን ኣብ ገለመለ ዕግርግር ክኸውን ከሎ ወይ ኣብ ጋቦን ወይ ገለ ንዓኹም ዝምልከት ኣይኮነን ንእሽተይ ካቨር ጌርኩም ትሓልፉ ኣብ ዩክሬን ኣብ ሰርቢያ ኣብ ካልእ ከጋጥም ከሎ ግን ዓብ ነገር ዓለም ሙሉእ ብዛዕባ ክትዛረብ ኩሉ ሃገራት ዓለም ድማ ኢደን ክሕውሳሉ ትፅበይ ኣለኹ እዚ ድማ ዓለም ብሙላ መንያቶ ፀልያቶ መዝመዛኹም ከያክል እቲ ፕሮፓጋንዳ ናትኩም እውን ኣይሰርሕን እዩ ዘሎ እያ ትብለኩም ዘላ እናበለ ትገልፆም ኣላ
as well, which he alluded to so much in that speech. Of course, we've all seen what's been happening in Niger in recent weeks. And this is an anti-Western narrative, but also an anti-French narrative, which is increasingly taking hold in Africa. We saw it in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger. Emmanuel Macron was very forceful in his defense of French interventions in those countries. He made absolutely clear to the ambassadors it needs to be got across to the world that those governments invited France in to help them try to combat jihadist forces. And he was very concerned about this narrative taking hold. These wars are often not popular within France. A lot of French soldiers die in them. And he was very keen to get across that this isn't France rampaging around Africa. Governments asked France in. They did make efforts to combat jihadists, limited success. He now says we must be careful not to overstay our welcome. It is clear that these interventions need to be reframed. He talked about a new partnership with Kenya, which of course is not a former French colony. So that is something quite different. And he also mixed it with problems.
ካልእ ድማ እንታይ ይብላ ኣሎ እዚ ንሕና ንገብሮ ዘለና ብኣፍሪካ ምስ ካልኦት መንግስታት እቶም መንግስታት ሓገዝ ናትና ስለ ዝደለዩ ካብቲ ናይ ግብረ ሽበራዊ ሓይልታት ዘለዎ እቶም ግብረ ሽበራ ዝበሃል ዘለካ መብዛሕትኡ ግዜ ዓሌታት እዮም ብምዕራባውያን ዓሌታት ፋንት ዝኾኑ እዮም ብርግፅ ንሊብያ ንምውዳቕ ቡገይሩ ዝጀመረ እቲ ጂሃዲስት ዝበሃሉ ዘሎ ስለዚ ጂሃዲስት እውን ኣይኮኑን ሓደ ቀቢላ ናይቲ ሃገር እዮም ኣፅዋር ሂብካ ካልእ ሽም ትቦም ነቲ ሃገር ዲስታቢላይዝ ስለ ዝገብሩ ፈረንሳን ኣሜሪካን በይዝስ ኣለዎም ኣብኡ ነዚ ንከላኸለልኩም ኣለና ንሕግዘኩም ኣለና ትብብንዮ ትሕግዞም ነቶም ግብረ ሽበራ ዝህቡ ገንዘብን ኣፅዋርን ትህቦም በዚ ድማ ንሕግዘኩም ኣለና ኢልካ ስራሕካ ትሰርሕ ምዝመዛኻ ትቕፅል ማለት እዩ ነዚ ክንሕግዝ ኢልና ኢና መፂና ስለዚ ንገብሮ ዘለና ሞራላዊ ግዴታናን ነተን ህዝቢ ዝደሊ ነቲ ሃገር ዝድለይና ንገብር ዘለና ይብላ ኣሎ ብርግፅ ግን እቲ ሃገር ኣይንደልየኩምን ኢና ውፅኡልና ጉዳይና ሞትናን ድኻምነትናን ድኽነትናን ይሕሸና እዩ ዝብሎም ዘሎ ምክንያቱ እሳቶም ፀሪጎም ተታሃልዮምሉ ቀሊል ኣይኮነን ምክንያቱ ንሳቶም ደፊኖሞ ዘሎ ፈንጅን ንሳቶም ክፈጥርዎ ዝኽእሉ ፅልዋታትን ከቢድ እዩ ብዙሕ ፈንጅታት ተኺሎም ኣለው ናይ ዘበናት ስለዚ ካብዚኣቶም ብቐሊል ኣይኮንካ ክትወፅእ ትኽእል ኢንፋክት ኣብዚ ኩነታት እዚ ብዙሓት ሰባት ነቲ ኩነታት ምስ ናይ ኤርትራ እናርኣዩ እዮም ዝገብርዎ ዘለው እቲ ካብ ምዕራባዊ ዓለም ክእለ ዝፈተነ ሲስተም ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ሓደ እዩ ዘሎ እሱ ድማ ኣብ ኤርትራ ዘሎ እዩ ናይ ኤርትራ ድማ እንታይ ዓይነት ቻለንጅ ሕልፈሉ ኣብ ካልእ ክገብረልኩም እየ ብዙሓት ኤርትራ ተሓልፎ ዘላ መስገደል እዚ ክፅበየኩም ንዓኹም ከምዚ ሕጂ ትበልዕዎ ዘለኹም ፓስታን ትምህርትን ገለመለን ዝውሃበኩም ዘሎ ረድኤታት ከምኡ የለን ብኩሉ ቀውጢ ክገብሩልኩም ከም ዝኽእሉ ብምባል ብዙሓት ኣፍሪካውያን እቲ ናይ ኤርትራ ተሓልፎ ዘላ መስገደል እሱ ምዃኑ ናፃ ኮይንካ ንኽትነብር ዋጋ ናቱ ከምኡ ምዃኑ እዮም ዝገልፅዎ ኣፍኮርስ ጉዳይ ናይ ኤርትራ ክንዳና ይፈልጥዎን እዮም ንሳቶም ብደገ ክሪእዎ ከለዉ ግን እቲ እንኩ ክፈልጥዎ ዝኽእሉ ንሱ እዩ ስለዚ እቲ ዕጫ ንምዕራባዊ ክትንብርክኽ ተዘይደሊኻ ከጋጥመካ ዝኽእል ዋጋ ክትከፍለሉ ከም ዘለካ እዮም ዝፈልጡ ዘለዉ
surrounding immigration here in France, and this idea that France as a former colonial power in Africa is being portrayed around the world as not dealing well with its former colonies, being too close to governments. He said that France had perhaps made a mistake in being sometimes very good with its relationship with certain governments and nurturing that, but ignoring civil society and failing to take into account just how popular or unpopular those governments were. There are also implications, he said, for people who have backgrounds from those countries who now live in France. And he said, again, it needs to be got across to the outside world. Yes, France has made mistakes, as all former colonial powers have, but some of the positive elements of France's relationship with its former colonies, both outside in Africa and amongst descendants of those people within France.
Right, and we heard President Macron speaking earlier in that clip that we played for you about France's unwavering support for the president of Niger. We're going to focus a bit more on that in just a moment. But Angela, just tell us what else struck you from this speech, which Macron said was really a lucid assessment of the world, in his opinion.
Yeah, this was an extraordinary speech, looking at the entire world, although he said he wouldn't. We even talked about polar regions and also looking pretty much at the future and all its problems, ranging from mineral resources to artificial intelligence to climate challenges, and of course the fact that everyone needs to pull together to work on them. Two very important takeaways. He talked about the European Union having a greater role with NATO. France has recently become much more supportive of Ukraine joining NATO. That is new. It's not new in this speech, but it's a recent development. It vetoed the idea of NATO membership or blocked it before. It knows that it's not going to join very soon because the US is against it. And the other idea, which is fairly new, which he alluded to, is expansion of the European Union. France in the past was very much against that.
Angela, thank you for that. Prince Lefor's end.
So, ከም ንሪኦ ዘለና ኣብ ምዕራባዊ ዓለም ብፍላይ ፍራንስ ኣዝዩ ስክፍታ ፈጢሩላ ከም ዘሎን ለውጢ ኣብቲ ኤውሮጳዊ ሕብረት ንምሕያሉ ወታደራዊ ሓይላ ንምጥንኻር ናይ ኤውሮጳዊ ሕብረት ቀደም ዘይገብርዎ ዝነበሩ ክገብሩ ጀሚሮም ኣሎ ምክንያቱ ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ሉዝ ስለ ዝገብሩ ዘለዉ ብሓፈሻ ግን እቲ ኣብ ምስ ነቶም ዝገዝኦም ዝነበሩ ሃገራት ዝገብርዎ ዝነበሩ ጉድለታት ብዙሕ ፅቡቅ ጌርና ኢና ጉድለታት ነይሩና ምክንያቱ ነቶም መንግስታት ህዝቢ ዘይደልዮም ከሎ ንድግፎም ነይርና ምሳቶም ክሰርሕ ንመርፅ ነይርና ኣብ ክንድኾም ግን ነቲ ህዝቢ ክንሰምዕ ነይሩና እዚ ዓይነቱ ዘረባ ይዛረብ ዘሎ ብሓቂ ግን እቲ ህዝቢ ጠቕሊልካ ክትወፃሉ ዝግባኣካ ነይሩ ዓድኹም ከተመሓድሩ ነይርኩም ትቀደም ሰረቕኩምን ዝመዝመዝኩምን ሃብቲ እኹል ነይሩ ብኡ ጌርኩም ቁጠባኹም ቀዳማይ ዓለም ጌርኩም ኣለኹም እቲ ህዝቢ ዕጫ በቲ ተሪፉ ዘሎ ፀጋታት ሃገሩ ንክገብር መሓገዝኩም ግን ገዛእቲ ሓይልታት ኣይፀግቡ ተመስገና ይብሉ ኩሉ ግዜ ድማ ነቲ ዝለመድዎ ክገድፍዎ ይደልዩን እዮም ስለዚ ኣፍሪካ እዚ ዕጫ እዚ ዘጋጥም ዘሎ ሓደ ዓብይ መድረክ ናይ ለውጢ ኣብ ኣፍሪካ ይካየድ ኣሎ ነፍሲ ወከፍ ሰብ ድማ ብቐረባ ክንከታተሎ ኢና ንነፍሲ ወከፍ ዘሎ ኩነታት ድማ ምስ ዝሰማማዕ ሓበሬታ እናሃብኩኹም ክኸይደ ነፍሲ ወከፍ ድማ ነዚ ኩነታት እዚ ፅቡቅ ጌሩ ከስተውዕለሉን ክጥቀመሉን ከም ዘለዎ ክነግረኩም ይደሊ ኣይ ሆፕ እዚ ሓበሬታ ሰሚዕኩም ፕሊስ ላይክ ግበርዎ ነዚ ቻነል ሰፖርት ግበሩ ምክንያቱ ላይክ ኤንድ ሰፖርት ዘይጌርኩም እዚ ቻነል እዚ ሓበሬታ እዚ ምናልባት ኣይደልይዎም ክኾኑ ይኽእሉ እዮም